Welcome, everyone. I am not going to pick on the one person who I think is in New York City on vacation and is in this meeting. He should be out in New York City and listening to the recording. I get it, but I was going to send you some restaurant recommendations, actually, you and your husband. But anyway, good evening, everyone. We are on chapter 4 tonight. And so, what I would want to remind everyone of is we should have been on chapter 5 tonight. Um, uh, so let me just get my book out. Next week we are on the the delegate. Tonight we are on the area committee. And then after the area delegate, the next chapter after that is the general service conference. So just hold on one second. I'm sorry. We're on area assembly tonight. So I apologize. We are on chapter 3, the area assembly and its activities. We did the DCM last week. So here's what I'm going to remind everybody of. Ordinarily, next week, we would be on the area committee. We are going to skip that next week and go back to it because I asked a current area delegate who is also the chair of a conference committee to share some experience, and that area delegate blocked out that date. So I am going to be flexible and just move it. But what I want to stress tonight, if you looked at the service manual, is the picture. And it's not really a picture, it's more of a diagram that's color coded. But again, I have to stress, every area does business differently. Every area. If you go through the sections in the service manual in this chapter, it says the area assembly and its activities, the purpose, the composition, the election assemblies, regular non-election assembly, eligibility to vote, and it goes on. But something that you all should know is that when this all first started, most areas only had one assembly every 2 years, the election assembly. It was the area committee that got together in between that time. Over time, we have created more meetings, and I'm not saying complication, but I don't know how many areas are represented tonight, but quite a few. And I can already see at least 4 regions, 5. Some of you go to assemblies that are one day in a high school or a VFW hall. Some of you go to assemblies that are all weekend, twice a year. There's other of you here that go to assemblies 4 times a year, all weekend. It is such a mixed bag. But I'm going to start with the assembly is made up of GSRs and DCMs, and then area officers. That's even a complicated term. In some areas, the delegate and alternate delegate are considered part of the area officers. In other areas, the delegate and alternate delegate are over here to the left, but the officers are only the chair, the alternate chair, the registrar, the treasurer, the secretary. And then we have how many different kinds of secretaries do we have? We went through this with district. We have some areas that have one secretary. We have some areas that have a recording and a corresponding. It's hard for people to believe this day and age that many areas did not have registrars 40 years ago. That was part of the secretary's job. So all of you have to be familiar with your areas, whatever you call it. Handbook, guideline, current practice, call it whatever you want. But your GSRs need to come to your assembly. So if you are helping new GSRs, and there's a lot of people in here where my main goal is that I know that you interact with a lot of new GSRs, is how do you prepare your new GSRs for this thing called the assembly? All of us, we have a picture of what an assembly, or at least our own assembly, looks like. And some of us maybe have been to one or two others, some of us more. But to the new GSR who gets elected, by the way, in November or December, you might as well be talking about going on a field trip to Washington, D.C. What the hell is the assembly? What does it look like? What happens there? And so I don't think we take enough time helping GSRs to prepare to go to their first assembly. And I'm talking about, how do you book a room if it's a weekend thing? If you're in my area and you're a new GSR who gets elected in November, the rooms are already sold out. That just happens in a lot of areas. But then you should know where the backup hotels are. You should also help your new GSR register with GSO. Fill out the new group form. But then you have this chapter, the area assembly and its activities. You might want to sit down with that new GSR and explain, what does the assembly really do? Now, that's another complicated question. It depends on which one of the 93 areas you are. There are some areas that have no intergroups or central offices inside them. For some of us from very populated areas, that's hard for us to even comprehend. You go up to certain parts of Canada, there are thousands of square miles where there's no central office or intergroup. Same with certain places in the United States. So what does your area do? Does your area just elect a delegate, and that's how you communicate with New York? And that's how you get the information from the general for the General Service Conference? Or is your an area that's more of what I would call what has evolved the last 40 or 50 years? Does your area have an active corrections committee, an active public information committee, an active treatment committee, an active cooperation with professional community committee? Like a new GSR, they won't be able to absorb all of this, but they at least have to have a framework of why do they have to go to this meeting either one weekend, a quarter, or one day? Because I'm going to tell you, the biggest complaint I hear from people in service is going to a meeting and leaving there feeling like there was no purpose for the meeting. That's the biggest complaint I hear. Number one complaint. And so explain to them, what is the purpose of this meeting? Now, these weekend assemblies, it's kind of like going to a convention, because there's different meetings all weekend at different times. And there's what we call the actual assembly or the business meeting that is usually Saturday or Sunday. That's where a lot of reports are given. That's where motions for new business come up. That's where the delegate and the alternate delegate usually give reports. All of that stuff has to be explained. Now, I know this is controversial when I say it, because a couple of people apparently did some counting in their own areas since I talked about this 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. A lot of areas voting ratio does not look like the General Service Conference. In a lot of areas, if you add up all the area officers voting and alternates voting and DCMs, there's almost equal them to GSRs. If you look at the picture in the book, they think the assembly should look like the General Service Conference. 2/3 should be GSRs. I'm not saying that's going to happen in your area, but that is the goal. That was the lofty goal that Bill W. created when he created the original Third Legacy Manual. Now, who votes at your area assembly? Another quagmire for us to dig into. We still have one area where only GSRs vote. DCMs and area officers do not have a vote at the assembly portion of their weekend. DCMs and area officers can vote at the area committee. And in a lot of areas that have an active area committee, the area committee deals with usual and regular business. So it doesn't take up time at the assembly. And the assembly deals more with issues of large policy. But there are other areas. There was one until I want to say 2 or 3 years ago, where some groups got 2 votes and some groups got 1. And that blows people away. But that was because when that state area was first created, there were hardly any groups in the rural part of the state. Most of the groups existed in the urban part of the state. And the rural groups thought that their conscience, like that it was city dominated. And so they decided to give rural groups 2 votes and city groups 1 vote. So there's all different kinds of ways, but you need to know who votes at your area assembly. In the service manual, it says GSRs, DCMs, area officers, area committee chairs, and area delegate. There's also the look of the area assembly. Some area assemblies have a chairperson and a secretary sitting like at a table and a podium, and people come up and give reports. Some areas have like a My Big Fat Greek Wedding dais, where like the whole family sits up on the front table. Everybody does it differently, is my message here. Just help the new person understand why some people are sitting up there and other people are sitting here. Now, there's no doubt, I'm not saying the General Service Conference agenda items are not important. They are super, super important. But I probably would, depending on the day you get me, I might argue that the election of the delegate is more important than the feedback on the General Service Conference agenda items. Because at the end of the day, regardless of the feedback, your delegate has right of decision on how to vote. Now, to quell an urban myth out there, the conference charter does say in certain situations, an assembly could direct the delegate how to vote. But how are you going to know? It's anonymous electronic voting. So electing the delegate is super, super important. And if you are a new GSR, we say that we would like everybody to start on January the 1st. The delegate, the alternate delegate, all the area officers, all the GSRs, all the DCMs. I'm not sure I've been to an area in the last 20 or 30 years where there hasn't been some kind of staggered terms. So if you're a new GSR, what, you get to go to 2 or 3 assemblies before you elect a delegate in the fall, if it's an election year? And so I bring that up because that's an important thing to explain to people who go to assemblies. and probably one of my biggest pet peeves: acronyms. We use more acronyms and initials. We can't stop inventing them. We now have the PLB for plain language big book. We have a love affair with acronyms. But think about if you're a new person coming in. And then if you want to confuse them more, panel numbers. When you're a new GSR and you hear somebody go to the microphone and they say, "My name's Billy, I'm a panel 49 delegate to the General Service Conference," what does that mean? You have to take the time to explain. And for anyone here that does not know, the panel number is simply basically odd or even, because there's only two kinds of numbers, odd or even. And half of the areas are odd and half are even. Your panel is created by the first year that your delegate is serving in their term. So that's a little confusing. Not the year they're elected, because they're elected in November and start serving on January 1st. So I'll give an example from this year. Delegates that are elected this fall in about 45 areas, half of the areas, will start on January the 1st of 2026, believe it or not. They will be a panel 76 delegate. And in some areas, they consider the whole panel the panel. Some areas don't do that. Some areas, people say, "I'm the panel 76 chair," but let's stick to delegates. Any delegates elected this fall will be panel 76 delegates, meaning they'll go to the 76th General Service Conference and the 77th General Service Conference. Delegates who are in their first year are panel 75 delegates. So next year's conference in April, you'll have two kinds of delegates: panel 75 and panel 76. Panel 75s are the 2-year delegates. Panel 76 are the first-year delegates. You have to take the time to explain that to new people coming to assemblies. Election of the alternate delegate is super, super important. Every year that I can remember, some delegate has not made it to the General Service Conference. You can see it in the conference report because the Policy and Admissions Committee has to make a recommendation to approve that alternate delegate attending. Some years, like myself, as a perfect example, I was an alternate delegate one day, and then that night I went to bed a delegate because the delegate when I was serving passed away. You have to have a great alternate delegate. It's not a fill-in position. It's not a placeholder. We have to have very good alternate delegates. Now, that does not mean the alternate delegate is entitled to become delegate automatically. Some areas have different procedures for death or sickness, but I'm talking about in standard elections. If an alternate delegate's a bad alternate delegate, they're going to be a bad delegate. That's the best advice I can give. I'm sure you've had a bad cookie person or a bad coffee person at your home group or alternate coffee person. They don't just mysteriously become a good regular coffee person. But we have to elect good alternate delegates. But that election assembly is only one. Let's just use quarters. In a 2-year period, there's 8 quarters, 8 meetings, and 1 election assembly. So that means there's 7 assemblies that are not elections. Some more, some do every other month, but I'm just going to use the quarters as an example. But there's 7 other quarters of business. So in a lot of areas at the election assembly, they don't handle a lot of other business. In some areas, they handle no business except for the election assembly. But then you have the other 7. Now, one of the things we've seen in the last probably 30 or 40 years. So our structure was not meant to be a roadblock if a group wants to bring a motion to the assembly. In some areas, though, we have created officer committees that somehow have approval authority for what should be on the agenda of an assembly or not. I can't find anything in the service manual to go along with that. I think the groups are in charge, but you need to know the way to make a motion at your assembly. In my area that I live in right now, there's a date that you have to submit by. Otherwise, you have to make a time-sensitive motion and the body has to approve it. The other thing you have to make sure is who's allowed to submit motions. In my area, a GSR is not allowed to submit a motion, although a GSR can vote at the assembly. A GSR cannot submit a motion. Only a DCM or an area committee can, area officer. You need to know who can submit motions. And let's talk about voting. You need to know how your area does business. Is it by substantial unanimity, 2/3? And then let's talk about that election assembly, because it's really important that you help out the new people going to their first election assembly. The third legacy procedure is not something that you just automatically like fall into. It can be complicated. People drop out that don't get certain percentages, and we'll go through that at a further point when we're going through the manual. But you have to understand how delegates are elected, and we use ballot, and we have secret ballots. And in some areas, you need to know the requirements to stand for a position. In many areas, you have to be a DCM to stand for delegate. In many areas, you need to be a DCM to stand for an area officer. But you need to find that out. And again, I'm going to go back and say the only way to know that is to read your area's handbook, guidelines, or in my area, they call it the current practice. A couple other things I wanted to talk about it before I get to the General Service Conference. One of the things that I love, I don't know why they only talk about it in the area committee and not in the area assembly, but it comes up all the time, so I'm going to mention it, and that's past delegates voting or past delegates participating at area assemblies. They actually have a section on it in the next chapter for area committee, but not in area assemblies. But in some areas, a past delegate has a vote for life. It's very few now, thank God. I know that's a little personal opinion, but thank God. I can't find anywhere in the service manual where somebody should have a vote for life. But in almost every area, past delegates have a voice for life. And I'm not saying they shouldn't, but it should be measured and tempered. And it should be used only for important items. You should know how people sit at your assembly. In some areas, again, it looks like a wedding. You're told where to sit, maybe by district. In some areas, there's a past delegates table. either unofficially or officially. I don't understand why we take all that experience and put it next to a bunch of other people with all that experience and don't disperse them amongst the crowd so that other people can meet past delegates. But that's just me. Some of the other things that get done at assemblies are workshops on the traditions, workshops on the concepts. Sometimes there's like a GSR boot camp or a DCM boot camp or a GSR or DCM orientation. Those are all very helpful things at an area assembly. But let's talk about the General Service Conference and the area assembly. January the 1st, you get elected GSR, and 6 weeks later, the background and the final agenda come out. Which, if a GSR is reading the GSR section of the service manual, doesn't even talk about final conference agenda and background. And that's one of their most important jobs. But if you're working with a new GSR or you are a new GSR, you have to find out. You have to let them know, or you need to find out for yourself, when is the January assembly? Maybe you're a February assembly crowd, but most are January. You know why? Because February we have NARASA and PRASA and past delegates gatherings, and a lot of assemblies are in January. So what does that mean? That means when it comes to the conference agenda and background, the first assembly is useless. There's no background and there's no final agenda in January. Or if your assembly is in the first 2 weeks of February. So that means in your April assembly or March, your delegate is going to talk about agenda items or some way. Maybe they have Zoom meetings, maybe they have a travel district to district. But if you're a voting member of that assembly, you need to know how your delegate receives feedback. And you need to know, how do I get a hold of background information? Some areas send it out, a copy to every district chair. Some areas give it to the standing committees, PI background to PI, corrections background to correction. Everybody does it differently. But what are you going to do in the middle of February when you already had your February business meeting and now there's only one business meeting left at your group before the April assembly or whatever meeting you go to give your delegate feedback? We have to work with new GSRs to get them on some kind of schedule. And, you know, I can tell you, I know that sometimes I say that, listen, AA has shrunk. That's a fact since COVID. The regional forums are much smaller. Many groups are only online now. And I'm not complaining about that. I have my own feelings about that. But I am very impressed with the delegates out there who are using some kind of digital platform to have separate meetings from the assembly or district about reviewing the conference background and the proposed agenda items. I think it's one of the most effective things that's come out of COVID is these virtual meetings where anyone can join from the area or the district. And some areas, the delegate goes through the background and each agenda item. In some areas, the delegate might ask people to take apart, like, hey, you have item A, you have item B, you have item C from the PI committee. Every area does it differently. But I know I could get arrested in AA for saying this, and I'm not telling you to try to do the change right now, okay? What I am telling you is any belief that the delegate is in charge of how you review proposed agenda items and background is wrong and not in line with the concepts of the conference charter. Your area decides and your delegate facilitates. If you're still reviewing background information and agenda items like you did 30 or 40 years ago, the most reasonable thing I can say is maybe you could suggest a committee get put together, made up of the delegate and the alternate delegate, and maybe a past delegate and a couple of DCMs and a couple of GSRs, and maybe talk about how do we review background? How do we review the agenda? I know this will shock some people, but there was still one area left in the US and Canada that until last year did not send the final agenda to districts or groups. They didn't send it out. Now we all know what happens. Somebody met somebody at a regional forum or knows somebody in a private group on Facebook or whatever else and gets it. But we live in a world of mass communication today. And so if you think your way of reviewing agenda items is old-fashioned and outdated, it might be. And a lot of times we get married to the process. I became a delegate, so I do it the way the person before me did it. And this is a big change. I'm telling you. There are a couple of people I can see here who are what I call pre-PowerPoint AA service people, okay? Believe it or not, there was a time when there was no PowerPoint in Alcoholics Anonymous service. I know it's hard for us all to believe. Now, even though sometimes I think there can be death by PowerPoint, when you look at the quality of report backs after like 2000, 2002, 2005, the use of screens, the use of putting the agenda up on a screen, the use of visual to communicate, it's been outstanding. Now, what's not outstanding is a lot of pictures of delegates having ice cream or the kind of room they had or the view they have on the Times Square from their room. Like, that's nice and maybe should take a minute or two. But we're there at the assembly to do the business of Alcoholics Anonymous and especially to get feedback. Now, one of the other things, and I can already tell from some of the people that I see in this meeting, there are some areas that are refusing to change. And that's their, I guess, right as of right now. But because it was so hard, remember, okay, let's use me as an example. When I got the background information, okay, which for me came on like 15 square discs, okay? The old computer discs, okay? And a pile of paper this big. I asked for a paper copy and the discs, okay? And then you know what I had to do? I had to go to Kinko's, which doesn't even exist anymore. And I had to have copies made for everybody in the area that got a set of background, which took forever, like a week. And then I had to distribute them or mail them or drive them to people. Now, because communication was so slow back then, we still have some areas where either the delegate or like a committee of past delegates picks like 5 or 6 agenda items, and that's the only thing they ask their groups for feedback on. I don't understand that in 2025. In 2025, between SharePoint and Dropbox and a whole bunch of other things, it is easy to, you know, get background out there and to get information out there. But we still have some areas where they only ask the groups for feedback on like 10 or less items. If you're one of the areas that's still doing that, don't say that it was my idea. But maybe you form a committee to relook at that as to how the groups can better participate in all the decisions being made at the General Service Conference. I also want to talk about proposed agenda items. A lot of them go through assemblies, although we've kind of made that impossible lately. In most areas, the April assembly or March is focused on the General Service Conference that's going to happen in a couple of weeks, which means that the next assembly is July, which means that the next assembly after that is usually like October. Well, now we have a deadline for proposed agenda items of September 15th. I think September 30th again this year. But when you look at the timing of that, like we're sitting here right now, it's almost September. We used to say the best way of a proposed agenda item is from a group to a district to an area. So that way, when it got sent into GSO, it looked like it went through a group conscience procedure, like that there was really a need for this agenda item. But we've made it kind of hard. Unless you start in January now, you're not going to meet that September 15th or September 30th date. And that's the thing I want to stress about assemblies and the conference. The conference is a year-long process. We have to look at the whole year in totality. And we should be encouraging people, if we don't want groups and individuals to send in agenda items on their own, well, then we should make the dates friendly so that groups can get something on the agenda at your assembly. Otherwise, there's no time to do that. I am going to go to questions. Please send it in via chat. And I do want to, I don't usually do this, but I am going to give a huge welcome and glad to see you to Suzanne. Suzanne, could not be happier than to see you tonight. And we have all been sending huge prayers your way. And we are really, I couldn't be happier than to see you tonight. So please send in any questions. Dee, do we need to tell them what to do with chat again this week?
Yeah, we might just want to mention for those that are not familiar with Zoom's features that have changed for chat, it might show up that it's disabled, but if you click on main chat or new chat, you'll have those two options and just start to type in Billy's name and it'll come up where they can go directly to you.
And I'm sorry for that. I do not like the new chat feature in Zoom. I do not know why they changed it, but we have to live with this and it's very confusing for people. Okay, first question. Is there a rule anywhere that delegates have to vote? Past delegates have to vote? No. There's nothing mentioned in the literature at all. That is up to each individual area to decide whether a past delegate should have a vote. In a lot of areas, the immediate past delegate serves for 2 years as kind of like an ex officio officer and has a vote. But there's nothing in AA literature that says past delegates should have a vote for life. I'll wait for another question. Okay, good question. Do all areas use Robert's Rules of Order? I love this question for a lot of reasons. AA uses a modified version of Robert's Rules of Order. You could basically say that most areas' guidelines are based on something close to Robert's Rules of Order. But you have to check your area to make sure. Because most areas, and I've said this before, areas should have a simple form of how voting is done and the area assembly process like the General Service Conference has. Is the digital copy of the 2025 conference report available? Now, somebody could correct me. I don't think the hard copy is available yet. Please, if someone has a hard copy, send me a message, but I do not believe the final conference report is finished yet. Do you have an opinion? That's a bad question for me. You don't even need to ask me that question, all right? The answer is yes, you know? Do you have an opinion on the request from the delegate? I'm not going to say from what area. To all other area delegates on a PAI for the safety videos created by one of their districts. I do not believe that areas should be lobbying to other areas before the conference. Now, I know that could get me some hate mail, but I don't think it's our process. If your area thinks it has a good idea, they send it in. Building like a coalition or building some kind of caucus, I just am not in favor of that. It doesn't say to send a proposed agenda item to other areas. You send it in to the conference secretary. Is there a policy that sets a limit on the number of proposed agenda items that can be brought to the conference? We're going to talk a lot about this when we get to the annual conference. But no, there is not a limit currently. So somebody sent me something saying that this was from their area. The following shall be lifetime voting members of the assembly. All past delegates and past delegates from other areas who now reside in the geographic boundaries. That's just total insanity. We do not have lifetime appointments in Alcoholics Anonymous. But that area, they have them. Okay, another good question. Have you heard of the consensus method? Yes, I have. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail now. It's different than the Robert's Rules of Order. If you want to Google tonight, consensus method, please do. It's a different way of kind of getting a group conscience or a group to move in a particular direction. I do not believe there's any areas using this yet. There might be one. Our area, GSRs only choose 3 or 4 items to review. Every meeting does it this way, and it's totally random. So I guess that person is telling me that the GSR for the group chooses the 3 or 4 items to review with their group, which that makes sense to me, because you can't bring every item to the group. What I was talking about, in some areas, the delegate only asks for feedback on like a few items, not all the items. What alternatives do you suggest for areas and districts that subsidize GSR attendance at assemblies? That's an easy question for me. None. The group should be self-supporting, and funding a GSR is part of being a self-supporting group. If my group sends money to my area, that's to carry out 12-step work. It's not to pay for another group's GSR to go to the assembly. Self-support is paying for a GSR. So I would not suggest any alternative, except this one. We should have less groups in AA. We have too many groups. Our district is quite a distance from the area where the majority of the population of AA groups are. Is it appropriate for 3 of the districts to meet as a sort of inter-district meeting? So I think unofficially, no one can stop you from getting together and discussing how to work together. I think officially the districts could become part of a committee of cooperating with each other. Some areas have what's called sections or zones, which is a bunch of districts together. So you could do that. You would just have to be very careful to do something officially that went against your area guidelines. So I would want to know what those area guidelines said about that. What is the general idea behind groups and individuals not being able to bring motions to assemblies? In my area, motions are kept under wrap and you're not even informed about them until a couple of days before the assembly. Well, I think this is a bad trend in Alcoholics Anonymous. A group should be able to bring a motion to its assembly. The assembly reports to the group. And as far as hiding things or keeping them under wraps, it makes no sense to me. I don't know why. What is the big secret? I always say, I've served as a trustee. I've served as chair of AAWS. There are no CIA-like secrets at GSO. There are some personnel issues and legal issues that need to be confidential. But why are we trying to control information? And by the way, there are probably a lot of people here that someday may be a delegate or an area chair. I want to give you a big word of advice. The more you try to control something, the more you lose control, okay? If you want people to not trust you, then control everything and don't let them see it. And then you'll lose control. There's no reason for that in Alcoholics Anonymous whatsoever. And I'm just letting people know I will not read area numbers. I'm not getting in that game. Our area delegate chooses about 10 questions to bring to the group, but gladly accepts feedback from any of the current conference questions. I'm glad to hear that. But I will bet you that that's been going on for like 30 or 40 years. And when's the last time that was looked at? So I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying any company that's like in business or organization that hasn't changed in 30 or 40 years is not around anymore. Do you think there will ever be a time when the General Service Conference has hybrid participation? No, I do not. I do not. I think it'll be in person. I would probably rather go to one in person and every other year, one virtual than hybrid. Anyone who is in the business world who does hybrid meetings knows what a disaster they can be. I'm not against hybrid, but I just don't think the General Service Conference is going to go that way. How and when do they teach GSRs to participate and talk in district meetings, such as voting, minority opinion, and making motions for new business? I'm not sure they do, and I talk about this a lot at GSR and district. Like, we need to do a better job of orientating new people. No wonder they don't come back to this second meeting. We have to find a way to educate people in that January, February, March kind of when people are newly elected. Who is the best person to contact your area for a copy of their guidelines, handbook, etc.? I would say ask your DCM or the area chair. Either of those people should be able to help you. You might call them a district chair where you are or a DCMC, but definitely your area chair should be able to help you. And today, a lot of them are on websites. You know, and I want to tell you something else. Someone asked me a question last week. I have to get them back a response, but I'm just going to let everyone else here know in case you get the question, because a lot of the people that gave feedback are people that either come on Monday night or listen to recordings. Like, it is safe to say in today's world that districts and areas in almost every area are accepting electronic contributions. They might not all use the same method. Some use PayPal, some use Zelle, some use Venmo. There's a whole bunch of different ways. But, you know, we are getting into the 21st century, believe it or not. You know, I said this a long time ago. Before we had electronic contributions at GSO, and I was on the board of AAWS. One night before an AAWS meeting, we went to an Italian restaurant for dinner in the city. And I noticed when we walked in, it was a glass door, but you couldn't see through the glass because it had a sticker for every credit card it took. You ever see a door like that? Diners Club, Discover, I'm going back so far, they still had Traveler's Check sticker, right? Traveler's Checks, Diners Club, Visa, MasterCard. Everybody else knows that the easier you make it for someone to pay you, the easier it is for them to give you money. We live in a world today where if I had to find a check right now, I don't know what I would do. I'd have to go to the bank tomorrow and get 3 temporary checks because I do it online. Like, we have to get into the 21st century with contributions. And I heard from the East Central Regional Forum this past weekend, contributions are way down, like way, way down. We have to make it as easy as possible for an individual, group, or district to send a contribution to the General Service Board. And I don't know how a district or anyone else. I went to the Lake Worth Young People's meeting in like 2004 or 5. No, maybe it was like 2008, but they were already accepting electronic contributions. And I think somebody wanted to send them to AA jail. Like, you can't do this, you know? Like, very few people carry around cash today. And the other thing is the home groups that accept electronic contributions, the reports that I hear are they've never had better contributions. That it's easy for people to send it once or twice a month. So I just wanted to report that. I'm putting together a report of all the areas and districts. I'm still getting information, but I'll be glad to share that with everyone. How many areas dedicate 2 assemblies out of 4 or 5 assemblies per year to pre and post conference business? I do not know the answer to that question. Quite a few. A lot do, but some go above and beyond with other meetings. Let's see. I gotta change this so people can't know what area. Assembly attendance averages around 600 members. It is my understanding that they do not want to have any hybrid portion for their assemblies and been stated by more than one member with disabilities. Any reasoning for that, since we're supposed to be inclusive but not exclusive? Yeah, I can't tell you why. I'm only using it as an example because I happen to be there in person. I went to the Southern Wisconsin Area Assembly about a year ago. I forget which one it was. Oh, it might have been an election assembly. But anyway, I went to that assembly. They were fully hybrid. They did not use an outside company. They had a committee that had everything under control. I was blown away by how effective it was. I'm not here to tell any area they have to be hybrid or they have to be all in person. But obviously there's an accessibility. Accessibility is such an undefined word. You have people who are inaccessible because of physical disability. You have accessibility because where I live for my GSR, it's $1,500 a month for my group. I'm not a month, a year. That's what it costs us to send a GSR for hotel 4 times a year and travel and food. So economics is an accessibility issue, but it's really up to the group conscience of that area. We have time for one more question, if anybody has one more question. I'm going to repeat to everyone to just be ready that we will be coming back to the area committee. Next week, we will do the role of the delegate. The week after that, we will do the annual general service conference. And the week after that, we'll go back to the area committee, but there will be a delegate, a current delegate who's also a committee chair, sharing her experience, strength, and hope for about 10 or 15 minutes. Just so everybody can hear firsthand how her first year went, what she does as a committee chair, her experience at the conference. It will not be open season on questions for this delegate, by the way. If you have a question that pertains to her talk about being a delegate, it'll be accepted. Asking her to give opinions on conference agenda items or anything like that will obviously not happen. All right. With that, we will close with the responsibility statement. And let's see. I think she may have left, so I can't even ask for permission. So I'm just going to have to beg for forgiveness later on. Suzanne comes here every week. She's a recent past delegate from Massachusetts. She served as the chair of the conference finance committee. She has been in a battle with some real health issues in the last 5 or 6 months. So any prayers you can send her and her family that way, as well as our co-host Dee, who has had her own health issues. And let's keep those two in mind. in a moment of silence, and then we'll close with the responsibility statement. I am responsible when anyone anywhere reaches out for help.